Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this evening's Catherine of Siena lecture entitled Chisme as a Theological Language del Pueblo with Dr. Neomi DeAnda. We're so delighted that you have joined us this evening. Tonight's lecture is brought to you in partnership with Candler School of Theology's La Mesa Academy for Theological Studies and the Aquinas Center. My name is Alice Cameron, and I'm serving as the Aquinas Center's acting executive director. This year, the Aquinas Center is celebrating 35 years of providing community programs that invite ecumenical conversations while fostering faith and dialogue. Whether you are joining us in person or virtually, we are thrilled to celebrate the feast day of St. Catherine of Siena with you. While the actual feast day occurs on April 29th, our Catherine of Siena lecture celebrates the influence that this pivotal saint had on the Catholic Church by highlighting the voices of women theologians. At this time, it's my great pleasure to introduce you to my dear friend, DeAnda, who will share more about La Mesa Academy for Theological Studies.
Thank you, Alice. Buenas noches. My name is DeAnda, and tonight I'm here to tell you about La Mesa Academy for Theological Studies. And we're honored to collaborate with the Aquinas Center and to be a co-host for tonight's event. La Mesa Academy is Candler's newest theological education initiative, born out of the need to offer a space where pastoral and lay leaders can examine theological education through a wide and diverse lens. The goal is to reflect with an open mind on issues affecting society and their impact on the church and our communities at the intersection of denomination, ethnicity, and culture. La Mesa's mission is to offer radically accessible theological education to communities that historically have not had access to formal academic programs and seminaries like Candler. This will open incredible opportunities for Christian leaders to be well-informed and fulfill their call and better serve their faith communities. If you have any interest in what La Mesa has to offer or know someone who could benefit from our programs, let us talk at the end of the presentation. And now, I'll introduce Dr. Antonio Eduardo Alonso, Aquinas Catholic Studies Director and Professor of Culture at Candler School of Theology.
Good evening, everyone. It is my delight to introduce Dr. Neomi DeAnda this evening. Dr. DeAnda is a tenured associate professor at the University of Dayton, Department of Religious Studies. She teaches courses in religion, languages and cultures, Latinx and Latin American studies, race and ethnic studies, and women and gender studies. She is also a Human Rights Center research associate. She holds a PhD in constructive theology from Loyola University, Chicago. Dr. DeAnda has offered many scholarly presentations, publications, and exhibitions on her research, including her work on Chisme, Latinx Christology, the relationship between theology, Mary, and breast milk, and migrations in conjunction with the Marianist Social Justice Collaborative Immigrant Justice Team. She maintains a commitment to a border theology at the intersections of the environment, migrations, labor, and women, especially in light of her roots in El Paso, Texas, that are well represented in the physical room this evening. She is a past president of the Academy of Catholic Hispanic Theologians of the United States, ACTUS. Dr. DeAnda is a Catholic lay Marianist and part of the Micah Theotokos Marianist lay community. She has received numerous grants from places like the Hispanic Theological Initiative, the Wabash Center for Teaching and Learning in Religion and Theology, the Louisville Institute, and the Association of Marianist Universities. And most recently, she was named the Executive Director of the International Marian Research Institute, a role she will begin in July of this year. So please join me in welcoming my friend and favorite Chisme partner par excellence, Neomi DeAnda.
Thank you very much, Tony. And thank you to Alice and Valeria, who have been so gracious with the hospitality and getting me here, to the wonderful meal crews who have just provided so much great food from here in Decatur, as well as some really great chisme, and we have lots of ideas in the works now for that. A special thank you to the Oakley Center at Williams College, who hosted me last month and workshopped a draft of this paper with me. And a special thank you to all of you who are here near and far, and to those who have come from far, the Doctors DeAnda road crew, my parents, Rita and Tony, and my aunt and uncle, Mary and Victor. So thank you all for being here. They have driven around the country, starting in El Paso and taking a number of different stops, and have joined us tonight here in person. Thank you. First of all, I'd like to begin with a disclaimer, and here it is. We are human. All of our actions are imperfect. So chisme is imperfect, as is every form of human communication. Yes, chisme can be harmful and sinful. However, I ask that for the time of this lecture, we spend some time imagining and listening to the possibilities of what attention to chisme can teach us about God talk. Before moralizing chisme and discounting it as only sinful, join me in examining how chisme can function in the creation of wisdom through its messy, interwoven, and effective existence. I invite you to embrace tonight that which enlarged the space of your tent, the working document for the continental stage of the Synod 2021-2024, page 102, has asked of us, paragraph actually. Quote, the free and gratuitous attention to the other, which is the basis of listening, is not a limited resource to be jealously guarded, but an overflowing source that does not run out, but grows the more we draw from it, unquote. Okay, now I am going to share some chisme with you. Everyone lean in as you're able, even if you're on the live stream. And here it is. We, like Jesus, are incarnated and our bodies know it. So please respond. We're going to do a little bit of call and response for the first part of this. I want to make sure everybody's awake. We, like Jesus, are incarnated and our bodies know it. We, like Jesus, are incarnated and our bodies know it. Now, when I pause and lift my arm, please share that response. Humans only know through our bodies. As embryos in the womb, our organs begin to develop and grow. Those organs begin to function. We, like Jesus, are incarnated and our bodies know it. Newborns recognize voices they hear regularly. We, like Jesus, are incarnated and our bodies know it. The movement and swaying of dancing in the womb and arms on one's own can be understood as a form of teaching our traditions. For some, this teaching happens in all of these places and spaces. For others, this form of teaching happens only in the womb or in arms or on one's own. However, these places and spaces, in these places and spaces, our bodies attain wisdom because we, like Jesus, are incarnated and our bodies know it. And our bodies learn. We, like Jesus, are incarnated and our bodies know it. Our bodies also know when someone has mistreated us or when we have experienced the mistreatment of others. We, like Jesus, are incarnated and our bodies know it. We Catholics believe in creation as imago Dei, created in the image and likeness of God. That image of God is three persons, one God, which we call the Trinity. We, like Jesus, are incarnated and our bodies know it. We believe that God chooses to experience life as fully human, so the second person of the Trinity, the Word becomes incarnate. We believe that this incarnate Word was conceived and born by Mary and did not just drop into the earth as an adult. Although, as Sor Maria Ana Águeda de San Ignacio reminds us, that God could have chosen salvation history to occur in any way. We, like Jesus, are incarnated and our bodies know it. The Greek word for God is theos, and logos is the Greek word for reason. We can then build on the wisdom of Diana Hayes and say that theology is God talk. It is also a nod to the incarnate Word. It is also a nod to how we as humans grow in wisdom and reason in relationship with God, because we, like Jesus, are incarnated and our bodies know it. So if theology is God talk, and the way we grow in wisdom and knowledge of God, as scriptures say about the infant Jesus, then our ways of communicating are directly linked to our own incarnations, our own fleshly existence, our own bodies, and we, like Jesus, are incarnated and our bodies know it. Sure, professional theologians study for many years to write and publish theology, but everyone who engages in thinking about and communicating with the divine engages in God talk, and in what I'm calling theological languages. We engage theological languages through our own incarnations and with every difference and particularity which makes each of us unique, because we, like Jesus, are incarnated and our bodies know it. Are you tired yet? You get a break in a little bit. Catholics believe we are people of God and places of God, el Pueblo de Dios. Theological languages therefore exist in and through el Pueblo de Dios. One of these theological languages is Chisme. Chisme contends with truth from an experiential perspective. Chisme is incarnational and can be found in scriptures. Chisme is a language of lo cotidiano. Chisme is its own contextualized form of communication related to gossip and the tea. Chisme related to gossip has historically religious significance, and chisme related to the tea critically contends with structures of power. We, like Jesus, are incarnated and our bodies knowing. I was writing this paper by hand on a recent flight. Billie Jean, a person I did not know, was sitting next to Martin, my partner. Billie Jean was written what I wrote. Martin was in the middle seat, so Billie Jean may have been leaning over him a bit to read my paper. After about an hour of being lost in my work, I felt confident enough in my articulation, knowing it was clear as mud. I looked to Martin, who asked how I was doing, and I shrugged. Billie Jean then took the opportunity to ask whether I was writing a lecture. I responded affirmatively. She asked the topic. I said, Chisme. She looked at me puzzled, as she does not speak Spanish, so I said something like gossip. Then I explained what I was trying to communicate about Chisme. Chisme is a theological language. Chisme contends with truth from an experiential perspective. Chisme is incarnational. Chisme can be found in scriptures. Chisme is a language of lo cotidiano. Chisme is its own contextualized form of communication related to gossip and the tea. Chisme related to gossip has historically religious significance. Chisme related to the tea critically contends with structures of power. Because our bodies know, Billie Jean quickly jumped into the discussion and applied it to her own life and circumstances. She told me about her 2 work wives while discussing 2 particularly taxing situations in her life. By the way, strangers sharing their life stories with me in planes and airports is not at all new. Then, them slightly leaning across Martin is. She paused. She said, wow, I had not thought until this conversation that gossiping in these situations helped me relieve stress and alleviate anxiety. She also told me that because many were talking about one of the situations, they wrote a letter to people in power, which led to change in that situation. She then apologized for taking the rest of the flight to discuss her life rather than let me work. I thanked her profusely because I had not thought about the stress and anxiety pieces connected to Chisme in the past. What great Teología Dei en conjunto. So what is a definition of Chisme? When we look at the historical roots, both of Chisme and gossip, we find an interesting array. The historical roots for the word Chisme are unknown. Speculation has led to two dominant thoughts. It may come from chinche, a broad category of a number of parasitic bugs, including bedbugs. The second one is that chisme may arise from schism or cismar, which translates to enter into discord or divisions. These definitions of chisme seem to carry quite negative connotations. The history of the word gossip actually comes from a very different place. The 14th to 17th century texts that include the word gossip use it to mean godparent. From the 14th to late 19th century, a gossip could be one of a number of women invited to be present at the birth of a child. The word gossip can be used by people like Shakespeare and Milton, and we can see that using the given dictionary definitions of the word chisme and gossip allow for gossip lends itself in a historical sense to more positive connotations. However, the English word gossip has also often been linked to sinful acts. The pieces of a wise overseer, such as a godparent or someone present at a child's birth, link much more to my experiences and acts of chisme rather than gossip. So now I'm switching to some of my favorite interlocutors. A number of interlocutors have honored me with their time to further think about chisme. I am grateful to the oral tradition that has been built before I scripted it into these pages. Nestor Medina gave me the term chismeología, meaning the thinking with, about, and through chisme. Jacqueline Hidalgo and Matilde Moros have recorded 2 podcast conversations with me. In the second, Hidalgo uses the phrase critical chisme studies, which will be part of my ongoing work. Patrick Reyes and Edwin Aponte shared a conversation about what we don't talk about and how it relates to chisme. After years of thinking en conjunto in critical chisme studies with my Chismología crew, I began to research the topic of chisme in Spanish, which also led to some international articles written in English, and one in Portuguese. In preparation for tonight, and in addition to oral and written conversations with scholars on this topic, I asked 322 Latino-Latina Religious Experiences this spring semester at the University of Dayton, shout out to all of you listening, to describe 1 or 2 contributions from chisme to wisdom and knowledge as a way to engage these undergraduates in research. Their responses will be found throughout the remainder of this lecture. The following section provides summaries of the contributions made by these chismeologians. The way chisme functions within many of our communities, as well as a variety of other Latino Shua communities, may encompass the notion of a sponsor or someone who cares for an individual and spreads news of that individual out of concern. Chisme also provides demarcations for who belongs within the boundaries of certain circles of trust. When one chooses to chismear with another, one chooses individuals one trusts. We share chisme with those we trust and with whom we'd like to build closer relationships. One course participant notes, quote, chisme brings people together because it gives them something in common, unquote. People who do not trust one another hardly ever engage in chisme. As Rosie tells Quentin in the show Lopez versus Lopez, quote, I left you alone with those chismosas on purpose. It was a test. I trust you now. In our family, chisme is our love language. If we stop talking crap about you, we don't care anymore." Unquote. How is chisme a love language? This was a huge question at dinner, more about love languages than chisme. Engaging in chisme shows human finitude. Chisme often includes how one person has fallen short of what we believe is necessary to live one's best life. Chisme allows us to understand ourselves better. It compels us to be self-reflective. Vincent Laurie adds, quote, "Chisme allows for trust, intimacy, knowing your community, discerning vocation, engaging the world," unquote. Jacqueline Hidalgo imagines biblical text foundational to Christian tradition existing only as accounts of people engaging in chisme. Chisme is about trading information. Hidalgo analyzes how the author Paul establishes authority because of his connection to Chloe's people, who are a chisme knowledge circle, who have value within the community at Corinth. Paul also uses chisme about himself to establish connections and authority with people through his letters. An example of Hidalgo's interpretation of Paul in communication with the Corinthian and Galatian communities follows something like this, quote, "I'm part of your little chisme circle, so please listen to what I have to say." Whether they actually listened to what he had to say, we have no idea. Because what happens is Paul's letters get enshrined in this written form that we treat as scriptural and that we give authority to in certain kinds of ways. Because other people treated these letters with a certain kind of authority. But we don't know if the Corinthians or the Galatians actually bought Paul's chisme. They may not have. We have no idea, end quote. In this case, we only have the account of the written word carried forward. Hidalgo then expands on what chisme is doing as a form of knowledge. She says, and that it is a regulatory form of knowledge, and so there's a way in which we can think about how chisme sometimes has power that rivals the scriptural, unquote. She highlights the work of Jean-Pierre Ruiz, embedded in newness of revelation in daily life. Sharing of chisme usually comes through story form that can give insight into things which have been hidden. It's revelatory. Building on Willie James Jennings' work, Hidalgo uses chisme as a way to explain that chisme allows people to reveal hidden truths about the masters. Finally, Hidalgo discusses how chisme opens up who has power and authority to create knowledge, as well as what are the terms of the knowledge creation. Chisme upsets the daily rhythms of life because it is usually based upon questionable behavior. It can be an interpretive tool that forces us to re-examine ourselves within certain normative contexts. Jacob Land notes, "Some information is no longer chisme, which shows a change in social norms. Because chisme makes us engage and interpret moral behavior, it can help us with discernment. As Abdullah Al-Jami states, chisme helps in trying to fill out blanks in our life. Chisme provides a way for us to express in daily life that we are humans filled with contradictions. It allows us to track our experience against those of others, and so functions as a language of the people." So that's where I get the notion of language del pueblo. Brigitte Bangerzir et al. Studied gossip as a way to spread information. They found regarding gossip and sharing important information in communities of about 1,000 that, quote, "nominated individuals are indeed much more effective at diffusing a simple piece of information than other individuals, even village elders and elected officials. And when asked for nominations, villagers do not simply name locally central individuals, but actually name people who are globally central within the village. This suggests that people can use simple observations to learn valuable information about the complex social systems with which they are embedded, and that researchers and others who are interested in diffusing information have an easy and direct method of identifying highly central seeds, unquote. So it seems that people who have lots of connections with the village are the people who also share information through the sense of chisme at a much broader and cleaner level than others in the community. Pietro Simoli, in her article in 2009, states that chisme, quote, as in everyday conversation, can be assigned the following functions: an economy of information, maintenance of relationship between partners, definition of the speaker and hearer's personae at the time of chisme exchange, rapprochement, estrangement, or readjusting the portions in the scale of values, beliefs, ascriptions, etc., of gossip partners, unquote. She also claims chisme as an act of storytelling engaged by all people of all genders and has been a topic engaged by psychology, sociology, and computer science. In that same article, she leans on Nicholson, who says chisme makes a person more positive and that supervisors should include themselves in the chisme and call it management by wandering about. Just take note of that one. Small talk and intimate conversations are the natural niche for chisme. She continues, gossip style has been used for international intelligence endeavors because it provides failure of detection services. Chisme as a topic has been engaged by psychology. I already said that part. Dante Stevens writes, quote, chisme can give outside perspective to be less egocentric. Another course participant remarks, paying attention to one's own bodily reactions to chisme allows far better self-understanding. As has been stated by other authors, chisme involves intimacy and vulnerability. People use rumors when they need to fill in information gaps. People create a chisme social network to include themselves into a circle and to be able to claim for oneself the advantage of a quote-unquote proper group. Also, according to Pietro Simoli, the systems of relationships set in place by social classes are at least temporarily mocked, if not completely crossed by chisme. Katarina Tanaka discusses chisme as a social phenomenon. She claims that chisme is one of the oldest methods of communication. It can be destructive. Chisme can also be entertaining, fun, and positive for group interaction. Lucy Domingos claims chisme is a way to stay informed. However, it's important to think about the consequences of sharing this information because information can get twisted. Pope Francis brings stronger warnings against chisme and calls it an evil even worse than COVID-19. Oh, he's harsh on that one. Yeah, he really goes all out. Un poquito, yes. Cristina Diaz thinks it better to keep future goals to oneself and follow one's own path rather than be influenced by outside voices. A course participant wishing to remain anonymous claims that chisme can drive into misinformation with bad outcomes. Another course participant claims chisme can be positive and negative, and Isaac Sanson interjects, today chisme is seen as a form of spreading information for entertainment. While I do not want to deny that chisme may cause division among some individuals and bring hurt, I believe chisme has a variety of other effects. More significantly, chisme allows us to engage in encounters with one another, which force reflections upon the systems of power and morality at play within a particular situation, to then apply these understandings to regular patterns within those systems of power, so as to articulate and call out oppression. Chisme allows for the release of thoughts rather than keeping them bottled up, then releasing it through indirect behavioral violence, notices Ryan Metzger. This point relates to Billie Jean's insight about stress relief and anxiety alleviation. Amber Zanders adds, Chisme shapes culture and identities. Matilde Moros focuses on Chisme as a counter-narrative. This counter-narrative thinking works toward revealing and understanding truth of hidden realities of history, racialization, colonizations, sexual violence, social classes, and social paths. Chisme is then a mechanism of resistance to overly powerful false truth narratives. Chisme counters what is silenced by truth-making of those most in power and of those who write the narratives. As Moros claims, quote, because silence is never silent, unquote. Chisme continues as a murmur. Moros then turns to the testimonio as a form of counter-narrative because through testimonio, one gets to tell their own chisme. In necropolitical systems, some are marked for death and must die for others to live. These are the systems built of domination toward death. Testimonio, through chisme, is the murmur of people telling their truth. Through this lens of chisme, the chismeologian crafts their testimonio to counter the silencing and erasing of shouts towards systems which need certain people to survive, or what Kelly Brown Douglas calls essential workers, but not essential humans. Moros continues to enflesh this thought. Because of the oral tradition of power of chisme, she says, people can organize and even use technology in different ways without the need to travel or publish. Chisme provides knowledge about what is actually happening on the ground every day by people rather than the few who believe they hold the power of social structures. Chisme can subvert power according to D'Souza, who says, quote, when a person has been relegated to a certain social group, either through social conventions or through the accident of birth, chisme can be a way of embarrassment for all in power, as well as a fountain of information for the disempowered, unquote. In another example, the song We Don't Talk About Bruno highlights that there are scapegoats. Life happens to everyone. Yet some people take the fall for others. Much like Moros' notion of those silenced and erased, and Brown Douglas's notion of essential workers and not essential humans, this song provides the actual parody for someone being cast behind the walls to make life much better for everyone else. Yet, that person is only mentioned when someone is needed to take the blame. Quote, the talking of Bruno and the song takes element of their own experience of Bruno, either directly or indirectly, and they tie it to their own life experience and ascribe things that happen in their own lives, and I think rightly, unfairly, on Bruno. So Bruno becomes a foil to explain something that has happened in their lives that has nothing to do actually with Bruno, and so that's part of lived experience every day. People taking what they are experiencing and making connections to the wider world, says Edwin Aponte in the 2022 Chisme Symposium. The entire song of We Don't Talk About Bruno is a string of chismes. I have been told because of copyright reasons I cannot play that song. I'm technically not supposed to say the title either. But I do recommend, if you have not heard it, listen to its snazzy cha-cha salsa beat and its string of chisme. It's available on YouTube. Patrick Reyes makes astute points when discussing essential workers through the height of social distancing in the COVID-19 pandemic. Quote, in the academy, or even in my own institution, to say, y'all are trying to talk about things in a really abstract way. In 2020, when the fires were raging in California, less than a mile from the packing plant that my dad was working at, where he's trying to pack food because my entire team, myself included, was ordering food delivered to our houses. He's going in to check with his people to make sure they are all right in a global pandemic. When there's fires going around, he's going to work 10 to 12 hours a day to make sure I can order food from an app. That's stupid. Like, that's just idiotic to me. I know that it doesn't make any sense for me as someone who comes out of this community that has been so marginalized, so ignored as a Central Valley in California, for that valley to then become core to all of our safety, unquote. Reyes provides a strong example of the need to articulate concrete experiences in lo cotidiano, the place where Chisme exists. He also names truths hidden about safety during the social distancing of the COVID-19 pandemic and essential workers. So how do we look at Chisme a little bit more as a constant murmur against dynamics and systems of power? I return to Chisme as a constant murmur against the written word and systems of power, as I mentioned briefly earlier. Chisme as an incarnational act and a theological language del pueblo presents a constant and noisy murmur against voices and systems of power, especially the written word. The written word can only give a limited account. The written word captures but a moment in space and time. The written word is archaic at first drafting. The written word is limited to those who write. The written word has been upheld as the most important way to teach and share information. Published, peer-reviewed scholarly material are among the most powerful forms of knowledge creation. Bills drafted and voted into laws are considered the rules which govern the behavior of people in the USA. Catholic documents written by councils of bishop and voted upon are considered among the most important of Catholic teaching. Documents written by the Pope and proclaimed ex cathedra are considered documents of absolute infallible power for Catholic believers. However, all of these documents will not silence all people. In turn, those who write such documents and those who have the ability and power to create systems negatively moralize the way those without power communicate their agency and their discord. Not to pick on Pope Francis, but we'll just use that example again. Patricia Fasano et al. Studied Chisme in poor urban communities. They found that in the ethical moral realm, Chisme proposes an ethos rather than a moral system, because an ethos is a moral made hexus, gesture, and power, and is defined by moralities, therefore it opens a plurality, and because it equally values discord and practice. Therefore, the relationship between moral values and a practice is dynamic. Values are constantly changing and adapting to actual practices while simultaneously helping to form those same practices. The practices and gestures which form these ethos are multiple, with the possibility of Chisme being one. They name Myers-Spack, drawing on Erickson, who claims that Chisme unites various characteristics of ritual with an emphasis on the capacity for Chisme to help in overcoming ambivalence. Now, this article is written in Spanish, so I just lifted the Chisme out of there. Erickson wrote in English, he used the word gospel. Myers-Spack also claims that Chisme is connected to primordial rituals of humanity because it feeds into ambiguity and ambivalence. Gossip follows its own familiar rhythms and patterns because it combines content between recognition of formal pattern and surprise. It deals almost obsessively with the ingredient of ambivalence. This article was published in 2009, so clearly the topic of Chisme has spanned across Latin American theorists for quite a while as well. In the book, Archives of Conjure, Gender Theory and Religion, Solimar Otero spectacularly claims, quote, Chisme is a seductively powerful and quick form of storytelling that works specifically because it plays with the boundary of secrecy and the impropriety of revelation, unquote. Otero finds that Chisme is a modality that runs counter to an archive. Chisme allows for the existence of various myths simultaneously, on page and in our imaginations. In analyzing another scholar's work, they state, quote, Cabrera's writing often combines a range of normative forms: ethnography, archival history, reported speech, folktale, chisme, and mythology, unquote. Chisme, used by Cabrera as an interpretive, intertextual, intorial, performative, linguistic gender, spreads into multiple interpretations with connections to rituals. The work of the archives of conjure and the speculation for brujeria is necessary, and speculation is necessary. The world making, which comes out of this play between written word, oral exchanges, and imagination, is subversive and cannot be verified nor denied by convention. The use of chisme intermixed with the written word and imagination simultaneously creates wisdom while understanding dominant systems of wisdom creation, because this new knowledge cannot be negated. Participants in the Latino-Latina Religious Experiences course articulated very insightful responses when asked why women and historically minoritized population were often connected to chisme. Jesus Aponte Feliciano contends it allows for those in power to think less of groups using chisme. Shea Smith continues, because chisme is not held in high esteem, it can easily be shown as untrustworthy, and people sharing information gleaned through chisme can also be dismissed and further subordinated. Along the same line, policing of chisme is a form of control, claims Morgan McElroy. She then adds, many times people rant about how they have been wrong, which connects to Ian Brunner's statement, chisme is a form of resistance to those in power. It allows for self and communal improvement. Hidalgo and Reyes add that chisme assists with survival. Because of the level of intimacy associated with chisme, these spaces open sanctuary and safer spaces for things which cannot be written or openly discussed. I recently listened to an audiobook which came highly recommended to me. I will tell you the title for those of you here later so you don't buy it. Has been on a famous former talk show host turned network producer's book list, starts with an O, and has sold way too many copies. The author of this book states as one of their tenets for living in genius mode to always tell the truth to someone. This statement, made in the final chapter of the book, articulated my discomfort with the entire manuscript. What a position of power to always be able to speak the truth straight to another person. Only someone who has never feared for being outed in some way which would have deep impacts upon their life and livelihood would be able to make such a statement. Being raised in the USA borderlands means that I grew up knowing that one never asks another person their legal status in this country. Later in my life, I learned that well-developed chisme networks were the way people have been moved to safety because of enslavement, trafficking, need for medical care, and asylum. These cases and networks have not always been legal, while they may have been legal, sorry. These cases and networks have sometimes been legal, while they may have been unethical. Many times, truth, what is ethical and what is legal, is connected to the written word. Truth is said and unsaid. Truth is written and unwritten. Truth is an ever-growing, overflowing relationship with the messy, interwoven, contradictive, and effective ways of our human incarnational existence with God. The notion of the tea, developed by queer folks of color, gives us greater wisdom. What is the connection between the chi and chisme? And some of you may not have heard about the tea. This is a new topic, a new term used in discussing gossip or chisme, although it's not very new, so we're going to learn a little bit more about that. This past December, at an after-Christmas sale of a national big box store, I found a game called Millennial Loteria Gen Z Edition. Sitting next to the usual USA classics like Monopoly and Trivial Pursuit, and more recent phenomenon German-style board games like Settlers of Catan and Azul. Loteria is a game I know from family play at Christmas time and at church fundraisers. The game conjures memories of loads of fun and super tacky used prizes. The game boards, composed of individual pictures with labels, make up each tile. These pictures tell stories in and of themselves. They also tell collective stories. They tell of El Borracho, the man expected to always be drunk, or of La Sirena, the mermaid with her exposed breast, which some grandmothers would cover with marker because they fear the sexual impulses she would provoke in their young grandsons. Millennial Loteria Gen Z edition follows the same pattern with new pictures and names. I played this game during the first class period of Latino-Latina religious experiences this semester. The students quickly engaged and some laughed uncontrollably as I did not know how to pronounce some of the terms. I'm not going to try to pronounce them today. Actually, I was debunked and one of the students decided to call the game instead. The main reason I was convinced this game was necessary for class was the picture of La Spill the Tea. Since I have worked in Chisme for over 15 years, I found it incredibly interesting that the game included this notion. I also found it interesting that the game creators chose La Spill the Tea rather than El Spill the Tea or El Chisme or El Chismoso. The game creators also chose La Spill the Tea rather than Spill the Tea, which is the origin and strength of this phrase. I was left with many questions. What is being implied by a feminine gendering of a phrase created by queer people? How might the wisdom shared by Latino-Latina religious experiences course participants fit here? Was T, the letter, lengthened to T, T-E-A, because that's how it is on the game board, for the sake of creating an image? Or does the use of T-E-A show how this phrase has been used orally to the point that people just started connecting it with their own experience of a beverage made from leaves? The creators of this game clearly targeted Latino Schwa Gen Z populations. The game boards and cards are written in Spanglish. I appreciated the attention to my first language. I purchased not one, but 3 copies of this game to play with course participants, largely because of its Spanglish usage. These games were made specifically to be sold at Target stores nationwide and online. I purchased 1 copy in Chicago and 2 in Dayton. Such a creation shows the power of the Latino Schwa market, which is a topic for an entirely different series of paper. The game clearly shows how cultures adapt and change, including the economic cultures of capitalism. However, some course participants thought some of the game squares to be outdated labels for their generation. Now turning to the T, as in the letter. The T has been used to demarcate sharing the truth of those not in power, particularly queer folks of color. Spill the tea, T-E-A, means to tell the truth, often gossip. In this context, T, the letter, and T-E-A stand for truth, small t, and truth, large T. Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil by John Berendt, published in 1994, may be the first written citation of this phrase. In the novel, Berendt interviews Chablis, a drag queen. The novel reads, quote, "Chablis stitched a string of beads into the dress. That's just another reason I like my white boys," she said. "Plus, when black boys find out my tea, honey, they are ready to kick my ass." Your tea? Yeah, my tea, my thing, my business, what's going on in my life. According to Michael DeAnda, quote, "Spill the tea links to the ballroom scene, ball culture, as voguing spaces and houses. The documentary about ballroom, Paris is Burning, is a reason the phrase, the tea, is widely known. RuPaul makes a lot of Paris is Burning references as a way of situating Drag Race within the queer canon. Scissor Sisters use the phrase we're spilling tea and just dishing desserts one may deserve, unquote. DeAnda makes a commercial for a line of tea products to spill the tea with tati. Other uses of the tea, just the letter, may be the tea is hot, the tea is weak, or the tea is steaming. E. Patrick Johnson has a one-person show, Pouring Tea, Black Gay Men of the South Tell Their Tales, based upon stories collected from Black gay men. By the time I formally began studying theology, I had degrees in 3 other fields: psychology, English literature, and education. All of these fields taught me about the plurality of perspectives and differences of people around the world. Armando Abney, a renegade sociology professor, taught us as first-year undergraduate students about the Chicano movement. In his sociology class, we read the work of Gloria Anzaldúa. In English literature, we read Latin American women authors. Rudolfo Anaya's Bless Me Ultima was usual evening conversation in our residence hall. However, not until I started studying theology did I realize that the very few Latino faculty at the Hispanic Serving institution I attended paid so much attention to teaching us against the necropolitical which framed our lives. The focus of truth in Catholic theology, especially of the late 20th century until now, made me stop using the word truth with a big T, because it claimed a universality of human experience in relationship to God, with very limited differences in context and daily life integrated into it. I now use truth, capital T, within contextualized and situated experiences. While I continue to use the word chisme in wisdom growth, I give so much appreciation to queer folks of color who have been proclaiming the hidden truth while pouring and spilling the hot tea, because their bodies told them to counter normative social practices as part of those marked for death in this necropolitical state. In another example, Felicia Rose Chavez reflects in the Anti-Racist Writing Workshop about, quote, the first time my body knew the teacher was wrong, end quote. Why? Because our bodies know. And why do our bodies know? Because we, like Jesus, are incarnated and our bodies know. The critical study of chisme brings to the forefront how life cannot be disentangled and placed into silos for easy study. The critical study of chisme elevates the importance of dealing with the interwoven and interconnected complexities of life. We, like Jesus, are incarnated and our bodies know. In a society which very often values science and technology over the humanities, the realities which the critical study of chisme make present strongly affirm the need to study the complexities of life which the humanities provide. The critical study of chisme also affirms the commitment to particularity as part of the transformative struggle of justice, because we, like Jesus, are incarnated and our bodies know. The critical study of chisme contends with the T from experiential perspectives. Chisme is a theological language. Chisme contends with truth from experiential perspectives. Chisme is incarnational. Chisme can be found in Christian scriptures. Chisme is a language of lo cotidiano, because we, like Jesus, are incarnated and our bodies know. Chisme is its own contextualized form of communicated related to gossip and the tea. Chisme related to gossip has historically religious significance. Chisme related to the tea critically contends with structures of power. Chisme is a theological language because it helps us understand ourselves, God, and all of creation better as we struggle for transformative justice. At its best, chisme motivates us to examine ourselves and our social systems toward new imaginative and creative possibilities as a love language with God, because we, like Jesus, are incarnated and our bodies know. Mil gracias. Thank you so much. I'm just going to grab my glasses.
Oh, thank you so much, Dr. Naomi DeAnda, for a fabulous lecture. It's been such a joy to have you as our Catherine of Siena speaker, but also for helping us reimagine how we perceive Chisme and expanding our views on that. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
At this time, we'd love to open it up to the audience for any questions that we may have. And for those of you joining us virtually.
Someone's trying to shut down the Chisme.
I know.
For those of us joining us virtually, there's a little there's a Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. If you just, maneuver your mouse over to that and type your question in the chat, we have somebody who's monitoring that. And for those joining us in person, I'll pass the microphone around if anyone has any questions for Dr. DeAnda.
Sorry. Hey, Dr. DeAnda, thank you so much for this really insightful talk. I was particularly struck by the way that you described Chisme as both establishing bonds of trust within a community, but also presenting sort of threats towards institutional power, especially with the example of Pope Francis's extreme dismissal of gossip and chisme. And I was reminded by another form of speech that is often derided in religious communities, which is sarcasm. And I was wondering whether sarcasm, as a form of sort of veiled truth-telling, fits within this larger framework of chisme. I certainly think that it belongs in the discussion of tea that you introduced at the end of it. There's definitely a lot of room for sarcasm and shade and those kinds of discourses, but is there a similar structure in Chisme that?
I definitely do think that I would put sarcasm in similar categories as chisme. There's a piece that I didn't integrate into the paper that I'm still working on. That's the notion of what right now I'm calling a chisme sense. So the ability to note like when something is actually a chisme that you should pay attention to versus a chisme that is just slanderous or libel. And I think the same thing happens with sarcasm, being able to read the sarcasm and understand it. So that's one thing, is like there's the piece of developing an ability of a knowledge sense, or honing our skills in the practice of engaging these various forms of communication, and how we hone those. The other piece of that too is that both chisme and sarcasm are very particular and contextualized. So something can be sarcastic in one setting and can be just flat out a statement in another, right? And sometimes it can function as both, which is also a really fun way to look at things and play with them. And so chisme, I think, functions more as chisme regularly until it just becomes something widely accepted. So something like women wearing pants in a certain time was a big deal, and now it's just kind of common for women to wear pants in public and professionally. So that's just an example.
I was thinking too about the sarcasm thing. I think it depends on the power differential, right? Like if someone in a position of power is being sarcastic with someone powerless versus the reverse, it can also change the dynamic. That was a great question. I was wondering if this is just a really brilliant talk, and I'm really grateful for you being here and for the thoughtfulness with which you've approached it. And it's helped me reflect on a lot of situations, both in the church and in academia, in times when I felt powerless or in talking to people who feel powerless, and the opportunity to process something through a Chisme session is, like that person said, like it can be healing and relieving of stress, but also potentially lead to change too, like how we strategize. And on that note, on a more serious note, I was wondering if you've done any thinking about Chisme in relationship to the sexual abuse crisis in the church, because I think if we're attentive, there's a lot of Chisme, there still is a lot of Chisme in those kinds of situations, and how shutting down Chisme is a way of controlling that and maybe leaving a space where it could also lead to more positive change.
So I haven't done any direct writing or work on that, although I've thought about it very much. I think that is why Pope Francis is so counter-Chisme. The example I gave is not the only example he uses to speak out against Chisme, and I think that's largely because of this piece of the bad gossip that has spread and seems to continue to spread. But the notion of power and control definitely comes from these kind of big authoritative spaces and the desire to silence, not just in the sexual abuse crisis, but even in my work with asylum-seeking communities on the border, and even with the Me Too movement, and which very directly relates to the sexual abuse crisis in the church. So I do think that it's something to pay attention to, and it's the piece of the murmur piece that I think is just constantly there. It really is a check and balance to make sure that we are at least trying to be the best people we can. And while that management by wandering about, I think is very funny, it's a funny sounding statement, I think it's very smart for leaders who actually are on the ground paying attention to what is happening and what are people, where is the Chisme, and who is the central chismóloga, right? Like there's always a central person or a couple of central people, and who are those people in a community, in an organization, and one, why are people coming to them instead of coming to the people in power? So what are the power reads there, and what kind of power does that person have in that community? And like learning, understanding, reading, that's super important. And then the other side of that too is that knowing that that person is going to have a better gauge of what's going on in the community and the organization than many of the leaders who may not be engaged in that way. Also, maybe then lifting those people up into leadership positions may not be a bad thing either, or at least informing them about bigger decisions and other pieces.
Thank you, Dr. DeAnda, for the great conversation. I appreciate your engagement with queerness. As a gay man, I used Chisme to get my mom to be able to talk about my orientation. When I talked about it openly, it was like, what are you talking about? But then when I said, I went to this club, and can you guess what happened there? And then suddenly it was like, ¿Qué pasó?
You went into full telenovela mode.
Yeah, I even made up stories just to get her to acknowledge. But yeah, no, with queerness, some of my students we were reading Marcella Alcal's read in the Indecent Theology and Indecenting. And I was wondering if you could put those two into conversation, the question of what is not acceptable yet is brought out openly, right? Versus Chisme as perhaps like as a step toward. Is there any sort of graduality? Does Chisme serve as an avenue to really enter into these planes of things that are deemed right indecent or unacceptable to come out? I was wondering if you could just remark a little bit more about that.
So first, one, yes, everything you said, I think you answered your own question. But two, I think many times what we consider chisme falls into the category of what is considered indecent. The fact that I'm wearing socks is not a big deal. If I showed up and I said, I have my neighbor's socks on today, and I packed them in my suitcase, suddenly everybody's like, what is that? You know, how in the world did you get your neighbor's socks? And it's out of what we would consider the boundaries of normative behavior, quote unquote, mainstream normative behavior. Am I a thief and I go steal my neighbor's socks? Do they not have a washing machine and do their laundry in our laundromat? Or am I having some crazy affair with the neighbor and his socks got left in our house and then I just packed them? You know, I mean, these are all the possibilities. So I'm just bringing up the possible. You all are thinking them anyway. So, the question of what is considered indecent falls outside of those norms, those boundaries, right? And that's what Althaus-Reid is largely speaking about, that when we want to say these certain things are normative, but I think you're very right in that, even considering that now we're thinking about chisme and the way of viewing that and using it to read the situations of where are those boundaries and borders of what is considered decent and indecent and why it's considered decent and indecent. So I think it was very savvy of you to use chisme and your chismología to do that. But I also think that it's a way that chisme functions to help us engage and understand that further, which is one of the main reasons that when people, whenever I've talked on this subject in the past, and people get very upset right away, like all chisme is sinful and they just want to mark it out. I think that what you pointed to, Dr. Ruiz, is very much the piece of why it's important to give chisme a chance and really pay attention to what is happening. I know. That's a t-shirt, right, Dr. Alonso?
So we have a question online.
Yes, so this person asks, I'm wondering if you could speak to the tension between chisme as an expression of the everyday or as a disruptive moment that suspends the mundane character of the everyday and makes it a especially sacramental moment of profound human interaction.
Wow, okay, so I'll have to go write another paper for that, because that was like 10 things all at once. That's not fair. When you're online, you get a time to like think about this and fix it in the chat. I know. So chisme as part of lo cotidiano, or the everyday, is, I think, something that people engage in often. And as part of that, I do think that it's used to bring people together. So part of that is a sense of vulnerability and openness. And so if you're talking about sacramental moments, that's the piece where we allow openness of the sacred to enter, right? And kind of cross-pierce the normal and the whatever we call it, the daily, lo cotidiano, and make us stop and ponder. And so I think that vulnerability, one, I'm not sure it's like this profound, I'm going to now stop and I've had this God moment in this chisme experience, but it could be as simple as at a meal of almost strangers who start just telling stories of chisme and engage that, then that unites that group in a different way. And that's what I would call kind of that sacramental entry moment. And out of that also comes other creative kinds of pieces and ideas that conjure of imagination that Solimar Otero points to, so that there's kind of like the everyday that we don't question. We're eating, we're at a restaurant, we're having a meal, or we're at dinner, around our dinner table. But then the breaking open of possibilities and new imaginaries and new creativities is then that sacramental opening.
He was made known for that in the spilling of the tea. That's the article.
There you go. Thank you. Now I'll have to cite you for the title.
I'll take it.
Okay. I know. Yeah, I'll add you to my list now.
I'll come with another question. No, but it's not related, I promise. I was actually, when I was writing my dissertation, I was doing research on privacy. Well, what does the church teach about privacy? Queer educators in Catholic schools fired, right? And a lot of queer educators get fired precisely because of Chisme, right? Because the members of the community find a marriage license and then they report them, and obviously. So it made me wonder, and that I found no theology on privacy, and so Chisme and privacy are interesting because, right, to an extent, we also want to preserve to a degree a reasonable degree of privacy, right? So I was wondering if methodologically you can tease out how can you articulate a tool for evaluating when Chisme is infringing upon privacy, problematically, or, sometimes it should, right? Like, sometimes we want to use privacy to hide something, but I'm thinking, like, is there anything, I don't know, that's my half-formed question.
Well, that's a huge question for all kinds of things. People who, I'm trying to be really concrete here without outing anyone, but I guess the question about whose right to privacy and what is the right to privacy, how do we see that, and how is some people's privacy respected more than others, are huge questions in that sense. Because if a Chisme is going to out a certain member of a community for something, and so in Catholic schools that usually means that someone who is not living up to whatever, that I've had friends fired because they're not married through the Catholic Church. And so it happens in many different instances is what I'm saying, but we see much more in the media about our queer members being outed. So the question that we are all sinners, so why is the level of some people's privacy held? We're not out airing everybody's dirty laundry all the time. And why are certain pieces of privacy held as private, and why are others held as able to be outed? I think is one thing. Two, I do think, and I've said this before, Chisme can be very hurtful, and because it needs to be kept in kind of these circles of trust, especially within communities where lives are at stake. So in places where, let's talk about national governments that have tried to silence certain members of the media or certain members in the academy, and then those people are kind of moved through networks of Chisme into safer, more sanctuary spaces. There needs to be a level of trust, but it's complete vulnerability of the person who is being held in this extremely oppressive situation. So it also marks how oppressive the situation itself is. Did that even get close to what you were asking?
I'm trying to figure out how we figure out how do we balance that relationship, because privacy is important, but at the same time, exactly, it can be used as an indication for oppression. So, yeah, you did. It's just another paper.
We'll take one last question.
Thank you, Dr. DeAnda, for inviting us to think about this topic in a different way than the way we were taught growing up. And I just wanted to make a comment because where my mind went was growing up, I saw a good number of times and marriages where the husband was being unfaithful, openly in the larger society with the wife not knowing. And it was a chisme, whether it was for good intention or bad intention, the way it started, that went from one person to the other and finally came to the wife for her to know what's happening and for her to have the opportunity to make a decision about what to do next. So I had never thought about chisme that way in that it was a way in which that information empowered these women to do something about what was happening that otherwise they wouldn't have.
Could it also have been that it forced them to do something because maybe they did know? But it wasn't until somebody else confronted them with the chisme that now it's like, oh, other people know. So,
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Naomi DeAnda. You've been a fabulous speaker, and we've so enjoyed your talk. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here and everyone online.
Well, at this time, we just wanted to thank you all for joining us, but also Daniela and I would like to just also say a special thank you to the Aquinas Center team, Lyndon Abston, thank you for monitoring the chat for us tonight, Valeria Longhe, who does our Hispanic initiative work, and she'll be at tomorrow's event. But also to thank you to Dr. Tony Alonso, to Daniela Sacriste, and to our partners, Dr. Joanne Solis-Walker and Johanny Oakland, who could not be here this evening. But we look forward to more partnerships and collaborations to come with La Mesa Academy for Theological Studies. Daniela and I have a couple brief announcements before you go. There is a QR code on this side. If you don't mind taking the time to put your phone up against it and scan it, to those joining us virtually, that will be emailed to you. Please just take a few minutes to let us know what you think of this program. The Aquinas Center strives to host quality educational programs, and we'd love to know your thoughts on that. And then, and I'll turn it over to Daniela.
Well, thank you very much to Alice and the whole Aquinas Center team. From La Mesa, we are just honored to be part of this event. I also wanted to invite you guys to let you know that this lecture will happen again tomorrow, fully in Spanish, at Immaculate Heart Mary in Atlanta. It will include dinner. You don't want to miss that. And we'll get to listen to Dr. DeAnda giving this talk to a Spanish audience. Thank you so much, and we look forward to seeing you there tomorrow.